Yes, I do. Thank you, sir.
It's pretty stable.
Would you help me tape it back on?
You can break that for me.
Oh no, I'm not putting it on it.
Bloopers.
I want just one more just to be sure that's not going to go anywhere.
She uses this thing, it's so weird though.
I see you use it with like a pen.
No, that out just slightly.
You're the master here. I have no idea what I'm doing.
No, we'll see.
Who's going after Isaiah?
I say Travis, so he can show me how to rob banks and stuff.
Because if you're going next, you might want to read through your script once so that you know it. Or you can improv. The lighting's weird. Does it not look focused?
It's lopsided just a little bit, so let's just do that, and then double tap. There
Okay,
we go.
that's better.
Oh,
So-
okay. It was going out.
Whenever you're ready.
Give us the ballot, and we will no longer have to worry the federal government about our basic rights. Give us the ballot, and we will no longer plead with the federal government for the passage of an anti-lynching law. Give us the ballot, and we will fill our legislative halls with men of goodwill and love mercy. We will fill our legislative halls with men of goodwill. Give us the ballot, and we will fill the benches in the South with judges who will do justly and love mercy. Give us the ballot, and we will quietly and nonviolently, without rancor or bitterness, implement the Supreme Court's decision of May 17th, 1954. Those were just a few lines of the speech, Give Us the Ballot, by the incomparable Martin Luther King Jr. Those were the words that were used by a group of people who were not given their fundamental right of voting. And now, 50 years later of voting, he fought the good fight with the voting. He fought the good fight and won with the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, 50 years later, that same act has been stripped and is a shell of its former self. So let me back up for a second and explain what the Voting Rights Act is. The Voting Rights Act was implemented in 1965 after much fighting and much marching that was done by Martin Luther King and his civil rights movement. It was made for people, mainly African Americans and people who couldn't speak English, because people in the South, sadly, mainly in the South, it happened in the North too, but mainly in the South, there were laws, Jim Crow laws, and other laws that they just made up on the spot to not give people the fundamental right of voting. So they would do crazy, ridiculous things like ask you how many feathers are on a chicken or how many bubbles are in a bar of soap. They give you literacy tests, but since you grew up in a poor rural city in the South, you don't really know how to read, which is now illegal. Can't do that. They would tell them if you even got to the poll, which was the hard part, the polling station. If you even got there, they would tell you that you had the wrong date, you had the wrong time, or this wasn't even like the right place to vote. So this was well needed, especially in the South.
So you've told a really good story that you're about here, but in 2013.
Okay. But in 2013, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was completely ripped out. This section of the Voting Rights Act requires counties and states who have had a past of racism or prejudice in polling and voting has had a history of prejudice when it comes to voting. So it makes them have to report to the federal government what changes they're going to implement for, like, say if they want to impose like a literacy test, which they can't do. They have to go through the federal government to do that. But that was completely ripped out when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, wrote that in his majority opinion that things have changed in the South. Now, I don't think that's true, but that's just my opinion. Now with the flood of new vote, there are a flood of new voting restrictions, with restrictions that people have tried to enact for the sole purpose of preventing non-existent voter fraud, which does not exist whatsoever. And advocates have now turned to Section 2, which bars election procedures that discriminate based on race, if you're a woman, and if you speak a different language, stuff like that. So this new law with voter ID, that's totally illegal, according to this section. So as you can see, now more than ever, these same words that were chanted just 50 years ago are needed now more than ever before. And in this juncture in time of our nation's history, we need dedicated and courageous leadership. But more importantly, we have to get people interested in voting. According to statisticbrain.com, only 57% of Americans vote, which is a huge problem. Now, why is it so hard to get the rest of the 43% to vote? I feel that people don't know the history of voting and what people had to do. Mind you, just 50 years ago. This wasn't like 200 years ago. It's literally just like 50 years ago, where people were hung from trees for trying to vote, where not even 100 years ago, women were put in jail for trying to vote. So it's a serious problem that we have to address. We have to teach people, especially children, that voting is something that's needed. And I'm not saying this just to like, I'm saying this because it's important, especially since it's a free right. It's not something that we like other countries, they can't vote. It's not something like that. We actually had this right from the beginning. And I feel that if we teach children, teens, people who don't vote, which that kind of irks me too, because like when I was little, we learned all about this stuff, all about voting and what people had to go through, and it's a serious thing, serious problem. Not having people not vote.
You need to back up like a foot.
A foot?
And I'm not even sure where you want to pick up. Where do you want to pick up? Do you want to pick up with Selma?
Sure.
Okay, so you're like here, but you're doing really well. This sounds a lot better, natural.
They taught me how on March 7th, 1965, a peaceful group of protesters were marching from Selma, Alabama to the Capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. They taught me how these people were met by Alabama state troopers who were attacked with nightsticks and tear gas and whips after refusing to turn back. All this for to get a fundamental right that was promised to all Americans in the Constitution. Even more of a problem is that America is the greatest democracy in the world, but we're ranked 120th out of 169 countries of which voter turnout data exists, according to statisticbrain.com. While other democracies like Australia and a few other countries have made it illegal not to vote, even going as far as to give out small fines. They call this they call this compulsory voting, which means that everyone that is an eligible citizen of Australia who is eligible to vote, which is 18 and above, has to enroll and vote. And I believe that these policies are needed not just in Australia but in America, because voting is so important. It determines so many things, like how much money like a county or city or state gets, what policies can be pushed, and who has the power to run our country, who do we vote in to run our country. So it's very important to vote.
Do you want me to scroll down?
Yeah, I basically went through that.
So,
Woo! Okay, this is like me finishing up.
so where? So here, how can we stop history from repeating itself? Yeah,
So-
because you've said this up here already. So you can start here.
Step back just an inch.
Okay.
And more, that was more than an inch. But okay.
How can we stop history from repeating itself? How can we stop history from repeating itself? We can make it a law to vote. Make sure that there are laws put into place that will never take the greatest right away from us that we have as American citizens, the right to vote. Or we can reinstate laws that were already put into place to keep the fundamental right that was given to us all as American citizens. Also, we could teach the history of voting. And I really can't stress this enough, because it's just so important that we show our children what people had to go through to vote. We have to tell people about the marches and the injustices that happened to people and what they had to go through. Like the ridiculous tests that people had to do just to vote. How women were put in jail just for trying to vote. Also, we have to make voting a law so this tragedy never happens to anybody again. Thank you.
Very nice.